So we're going to hear a lot more, I think, about each of our speakers as we go on. So what I'm going to do is just introduce each of them briefly. Unfortunately, one of our participants had to send his regrets, Arslan Wancho. But that just means that we'll have more time for the group we have together today. So on your far right, we have Catherine Mazzocco, who you may have remembered as Katie Boyd when she was a student here at Ontario Tech, and you may have remembered that as University of Ontario Institute of Technology. But she is now legal counsel with Shoppers Drug Mart, Inc. To her right, next we have Ramisa Chowdhury, who is in project development with Canada Revenue Agency. Next, we have Rachel Cavelli, who's a manager with the Ontario Ministry of Infrastructure. Next, we have Danielle Colmenero, who's an investigations manager at the Ontario Ombudsman. And finally, Mike Stock, who also did his legal studies degree, but he's now an architect. And so we've brought together a group of individuals who have all gone into different fields, and I think can show us the possibilities of what you can do with a legal studies degree. And so I think maybe I'm going to sit down, and one of the reasons why we're using microphones, I trust everyone can hear me okay, but we want to be able to record this because there were a number of students who wrote to me and said, I really want to come, but I'm just not able to do that Wednesday evening. And so luckily Brendan here has pulled together heaven and earth and been able to set up this whole thing just before we got started. So we're grateful to him for making that possible. And so we've got these mics here, so yes. We've got a lot of Brendan fans, which is great. Okay, so so I think what we'll do, actually, Katie, if you want to just grab that mic, and I think maybe for start, we can just kind of go through and just, each of us perhaps can, or each of you rather, can talk a bit, just tell us a bit about, what you do and how you ended up being where you are now after graduating from the legal studies program.
So, is this working? Can everyone hear me? Okay, good. So I guess you could say I kind of went the obvious path from here. I went to law school after I graduated from my legal studies program. I decided to be a bit ambitious while I was there and just tacked on an MBA and ended up doing the dual degree program because, why not? I guess I was there anyway. I did that at U of T. At the time that I was studying there, I thought my path was going to take me into family law. I started doing a lot of volunteer work, taking positions in the family law space. I spent a bit of time doing that, but ultimately I started to kind of feel the emotional aspect of family law a little bit. I was finding it pretty difficult to listen to some of the stories I was listening to and to kind of see particularly children in the situations that they were in. So I kind of pivoted at that point in time. I already was working on the MBA. I know you don't know anything about this yet, but when you're in law school, there's kind of two recruit processes that happen where a lot of students end up with the firms that they ultimately article at. There's a recruit process that's kind of smaller that happens in your first year of law school, and then there's a second bigger one in your second year of law school. I ended up being recruited to one of the Bay Street firms, Davies, Ward, Phillips, and Weinberg, where I kind of started on this path of corporate law, which at the time I just noticed was a lot easier for me to emotionally digest compared to where I was coming from in the family law space. I ended up going back there a summer to second year. I articled there. I fell in with their commercial litigation group. I was called to the bar, and then I went back as an associate. So I practiced as a commercial litigator for roughly a year. It didn't take me very long to realize that that wasn't going to be the place for me either. The work was interesting. I enjoyed being a litigator. It's very creative. It's very writing driven, and you can be very argumentative and almost like a little bit sassy in the way you're drafting, and I really enjoyed that. I was not in love with other aspects of firm life. The lifestyle was very, very hard, which I'm happy to speak to if anyone wants to hear more about what that was like in my decision, but I started looking for exit strategies away from Bay Street. I was kind of spending my GO train ride, which was like the peaceful time of my day, looking for job postings. I ultimately came across one for Shoppers Drug Mart, actually Loblaws. So I'm legal counsel for Shoppers Drug Mart, but which I'm sure all of you know that company. It's less commonly known that Shoppers is part of the Loblaw group of companies. So my employer is technically Loblaws, but within that, there's kind of the healthcare and pharmacy side of the company, and then there's the grocery side. So when I say I'm legal counsel for Shoppers Drug Mart, I'm on the healthcare and pharmacy side of that business. So I ended up getting that job. I went in-house. I can talk a little bit, again, for those that want to hear about what it's like to be in-house legal counsel at a company of that size and kind of what I do and how it's organized. But at this point in time, I've been legal counsel to Shoppers Drug Mart for about a year.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ramisa Chowdhury. I am a graduate of the Legal Studies program class of 2016. My journey is a little bit different. So I actually entered the program thinking that I was going to go to law school. I was set on that being my path until I got to about second or third year is when I started thinking about what else might be out there in terms of further education, career-wise. So I ended up taking a gap year after I graduated to finalize what that decision was going to be. I took my time, I wrote the LSAT, studied for it. I even got acceptances to law school. However, I was debating between that and my Master of Public Administration, which is what I ended up doing at Queen's University. So that was the route that I decided was the better option for me in the long run in terms of what I wanted to do. So that was the route that I took. That was a pretty short program. I was in and out in about 10 months. And then after that, I worked for the Ontario Public Service for the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care, specifically in health policy, strategic health policy. From there, I actually moved on to the federal side. So I moved to Ottawa after that. And then I worked for Health Canada. And then from there, I moved on to the CRA, the Canada Revenue Agency, which is where I am now, which was a big change. Never thought I'd end up with the tax agency, but that just goes to show how unpredictable life can be sometimes, and you might end up in places that you least expected it. So when I started at the CRA, I was part of a project that looked into what the future of tax compliance might look like in about 50 years. I did that for about a year, and then I moved on to the team that I'm on right now, which is a digital transformation initiative, where we're trying to improve communication between taxpayers and small businesses. So that's basically the team that I'm on right now. The work that I do day to day really depends on the needs of the project. It could range from putting together reports, briefing notes for management, putting together presentations. In addition to my day-to-day job, I also am part of the Young Professionals Network at work. And on the side, I'm also volunteering with an NGO called Apathy is Boring. And we're actually involved in a project for the city as well, which aims at getting youth involved and helping them respond better to a humanitarian crisis, which we thought was fitting, given everything that's going on in the world right now. Yeah, that's what my journey has been so far.
Right.
Thank you. Our journeys are sort of similar. It'll be interesting. So my name's Rachel Calvelli. I'm a graduate from the 2012 Legal Studies program, so the first guinea pig class, sorry, of the first graduating class. I actually was just saying to someone, I actually started in the criminology program in the first year and ended up switching to legal studies because I didn't actually know it was even a program offering at the time. I also joked with people that I had to print out an address of the university at the time and show it to my dad to prove that it was actually a real university in Oshawa, because he didn't believe me. My family, we grew up in Pickering, and he was adamant there's no university in Oshawa. There's a college, but for sure not a university. So I had to prove that to him, which was funny. So how did I get there? Honestly, I didn't fully know what I wanted to do out of high school. I think we're quite young when we make these decisions, and I had great guidance counselors say, you really like history and politics and English. Have you thought about like poli-sci or those types of things? And sort of looked at different schools that frankly were commutable for me, that I could do one of those programs, and just landed in criminology because I thought it was sort of an interesting, more sort of practical for my immigrant dad way to get a social science degree that was interesting but still would kind of have a clear sort of job. I'm obviously not a criminologist now, so that didn't work, but I think to your point, it's interesting to see the different paths that you might take. In the legal studies program, I was really active in the student clubs and student politics, so not to like put a weird plug or anything, but the Social Science and Humanities Student Society, I hope still exists. I was part of the founding group for creating that student government group. And during my time in university, towards the end, similarly, I wasn't sure what I kind of wanted to do. I think when you're a high achiever and you're doing well in this program, a lot of what I had sort of heard was you go to law school, you're in a legal studies program, so clearly that's sort of the next path. But I also wasn't 100% sure I wanted to be a practicing lawyer. I really liked law as sort of an avenue for social policy and social change, and I kind of learned towards the end of the program that it's one of many sort of tools to sort of do that, public policy being one of them as well. Towards the end of my program in fourth year, I was applying to law schools because still wasn't sure. Everyone's telling me to apply, so I'll still apply. Did the LSAT. I hated the LSAT. It was really hard. And I also decided to run for student council president at the time when, I was going to say UIT, when Ontario Tech University and Durham College were still together as one student union, and decided to sort of defer my decision, also do a gap year and I was elected and then did the year as the student government president for the student body, which I loved. I always loved making a difference and being involved in government, and through that work, I got really involved in some student lobbying groups at sort of the provincial level, and got to sort of go to Queen's Park a couple times to advocate on behalf of students for tuition reform and sort of tuition freezes at the time, and kind of got really interested in government and asked around saying like, how do you get a job in government? What does that sort of look like? And people had said, you go to school for public policy or public administration. So at that time, I had sort of rethought the law and the practicing lawyer angle and decided to instead apply to public policy and public administration programs. I also did the Queen's program in public administration, and during that time, sort of honestly applied everywhere, to the feds, to local government, to the provincial government, not-for-profits, and just had luck landing with the province at the time in training colleges and universities, working on employment and training sort of program policy design, because I had some experience from student lobbying. So also sort of went a bit of a different path, and I would say the legal studies program gave me those sort of root skills and experiences that I needed, one, to be successful in grad school, but also as I joined the Ontario Public Service, and I've been there for almost 10 years now, thinking through or getting experience in leadership opportunities. So I know group projects were the bane of my existence sometimes in school, but it's really true that you don't get to choose who you work with a lot of times. So getting some of those foundational skills in relationship building, diplomacy, negotiation, working with people of all different skill sets, but also the diversity of the program and people that you got to meet and work with, and appreciate different cultures, different backgrounds and experiences is something that I really took with me as well. So now I've been in the province, as I said, for about 10 years. I have worked in the first ministry I talked about, but also in children and youth mental health policy design and funding design, cabinet office, and right now I've been in, very randomly, similar to I think your story, in the Ministry of Infrastructure, which people kind of fall into in government. I certainly didn't target it, but I think what's interesting about it is there's a lot of social policy impact about the way we design infrastructure, but also my area was designing funding programs for communities for infrastructure. So I think, again, the legal studies program and having that sort of social policy background has helped me bring that lens to the work of designing funding programs. So, you know, making sure the way we design them takes into consideration underserved communities and how, you know, different areas might need more schools or hospitals or access to employment is a big lens that has been really helpful in my work. And so, yeah, that's how I've ended up there, and I really have enjoyed it, surprisingly, and took a bit of a different path as well. So also happy to answer any questions like that, and just wanted to reiterate the message. I think that there's lots of different ways that you can go and leverage the skills and experiences that you're getting in the program.
Hi, everybody. My name is Danielle Colmanero, and I was the graduating class here of 2013, so the second graduating class of the Legal Studies program. And I first learned about the university from in high school. You go to that university fair at the convention center, and they had a booth, and that was the first time I had heard of the university. And I knew I wanted to be a lawyer since when I was 11 years old, and I knew I didn't want to be a criminal lawyer. And so I was looking for something that was law but not criminology, and this was one of the only programs I had heard of that kind of had that intersection at the time. So I was happy to be able to do that, and living in a neighboring town, it was easy access for me. Decision was very easy at that time. I had a lot of great experiences here. I was a research assistant, and formed some close connections through some clubs and groups here on campus, and was still determined that I was going to be a practicing lawyer in human rights law. So I did the human rights specialization. I also did a minor in psychology of law. I don't know that they have that anymore, but it was great, and I went charged ahead, did the LSAT, and when I was looking for which law schools I would apply to, I was really narrowly focused on Ontario law schools, because I assumed I want to practice in Ontario and need to go to Ontario Law School. And it was a professor here that actually told me that I should look at West Coast law schools, specifically the University of Victoria, which has fabulous courses in Aboriginal law and has a human rights lens and social justice lens, and that actually fit with me really well. And I did go out there, and I was still able to come back and pass the bar in Ontario. So that did work out. So if any of you are considering law school, I encourage you to look at all of your options in that way. So I did go to law school. I did go to the University of Victoria, or UVic, as we like to call it, and had a very fabulous experience there as well, came back here and articled at a legal clinic. So at a legal clinic that's funded by legal aid, you are doing a lot of work with lower income folks in assisting them with high impact tribunal work that they're engaged with. So we're talking about appeals for eviction at the Landlord and Tenant Board. We're talking about appeals for the Ontario Disability Support Program, if there's denials, that kind of thing. So you're really on the ground doing a lot of that engagement with an underserved community and attempting to help them protect their rights under the law. And so that was very meaningful work, and I liked it a lot, but it did teach me that despite my determination to be a practicing lawyer, I didn't really think litigation was for me, and so I was looking for something else. And it just so happened that as I was finishing up my time at the legal clinic, I actually was contacted on LinkedIn. So another life lesson, keep your LinkedIn profiles up to date, saying that the Ontario Ombudsman was looking to hire an early resolution officer. And I had the type of background in terms of my work experience and educational experience that would potentially make me a good fit for what they were looking for. And so I did go through that process. I was successful, and I worked as an early resolution officer for about a year at the Ombudsman's office. So quick idea of the Ombudsman's office, if you haven't heard of it, it is a independent office of the legislature that oversees provincial ministries in the province of Ontario, as well as municipalities, publicly funded colleges, universities, school boards. So quite a few organizations there, and we look at complaints regarding administrative fairness in terms of the administration of programs and services and actions, decisions of the organizations we oversee. So despite the fact that it was not a practicing position, it was a really good fit for me, who was always looking at the, social policy angle of things and going and, assisting the community, but in a different way, in a way that was, an advocate not necessarily for the client, but for fairness itself. So very good fit for me. I enjoyed it a lot. The opportunity came up to apply for an internal promotion to the investigator position, and I was an investigator there for about 4 years until an acting opportunity came up to cover a manager position. And then I found that I liked it so much that I did seek to be made permanent, and now I've been a permanent investigations manager at the Ombudsman's office, and there I remain. So that's my journey, and I think it just goes to show you that you might be really determined, that you know right now where you're going to end up, but keeping an open mind and going with the flow in terms of when opportunities come up. I can't understate the value of that. It's a really good thing to keep in mind, and I'm glad that I went with the flow, so to speak, with that. So thank you.
All right, time for the architect to speak. Congratulations to all 4 of the other women up here for successful careers and seeing what you can do and show what you can do with a degree from legal studies. I guess, to be completely honest, my story is filled with a lot of roadblocks and failures to where I ended up today. I left high school to go to urban planning at Ryerson and dropped out after 4 months. And you're 17, I was 17 years old at the time. Like, I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life, no idea where I wanted to go. So I just went to downtown Toronto, and it sounded like a blast. So I did that. Then, kind of had a reality check as to what did I enjoy doing in high school. And I always enjoyed law class. I excelled in law class. So I said, why not be a lawyer? It was kind of perfect timing that Suits had just come out on TV. So I said, black Mercedes-Benz, downtown Toronto, that all sounds pretty good. Let's see if we can make that happen. So I went to UOIT. I grew up in Whitby, and it was close by. All my friends were still in town, so it all seemed to kind of work out. I graduated 2013 as well. And the school was small. We had small class sizes, which was a huge benefit to be able to meet professors, meet classmates, join some of the, what was it called? Student Law Association. That's it. Yeah. Student Law Association. So we were, I think many of us were part of that. And we were able to do a thesis. I thought the big thing about the undergrad program was to be able to do a thesis in the last year. So I worked with Professor McMorrow on my thesis. And I thought, let's go to law school after that. So when I graduated, I moved to Calgary. There was opportunities out there in oil and gas and kind of contract law stuff that I wanted to get into. NHL hockey agent sounded pretty good as well in terms of legal things and contracts. So all the ideas were flowing at that time. And then I went out there, and I did not like the file folders that would pile up on the desk, and reading through this, and who owns this parcel of land and is selling this piece of land to this person, and following kind of the chain of custody of that. So, and then I'll just put in the plug that I failed the LSAT twice, so that wasn't a big motivator. So it's like, well, abandon Canada and go to the UK and get a degree without an LSAT, because why not? Let's go do that. UK is pretty fun. But then you got to come back here and you got to recertify yourself, so it's more time, more money. It's always, you know, funding yourself through university is never easy, so I was cash strapped, but I did another reality check. I talked to my mom on the phone. I'm like, what am I supposed to do? I failed the LSAT twice. And she's like, well, you liked drawing as a kid. I'm like, oh, all right. What can I do with drawing? And I looked up programs that every architecture program I looked up is like, you need to have an undergrad. I'm like, there's no way I'm doing 4 more years of school to go then do a master's, because you have to be master's trained in order to be a licensed architect in Ontario. But then I found Carleton had a program, U of T had a program, and Calgary had a program. So I'm like, all right, I got good grades, let's go see if we can make this happen. I'll apply to the UK as well for law school. So I called my mom and I said, I need you to go downstairs and scan every single piece of art I did from that you have still in the basement to now, because I need to start drawing to make what they're asking for is a portfolio. And I'm like, I have no idea what the heck a portfolio is. So I was Googling what a portfolio looks like, how to put a portfolio together. I was drawing things. I bought architecture Lego, which is just all white blocked Lego, and I was designing things and taking pictures. I'm like, this is gonna be, they're gonna laugh me right out of the application. Calgary told me you're not in, Toronto told me you're not in, Carleton's like, well, you're waitlisted, and you're like 12th in line. I'm like, that's a long line. So let's see what the UK has in store, and then lo and behold, after calling Carleton every week for 4 weeks straight, they told me I'm in, because 11 people dropped out. So I made my way to architecture school, packed up things in Calgary, moved to Ottawa, had never stepped foot in the city, and walked my first day into school, and you do your introductions of why you're here, and it's like, well, urban design, we have fine arts, and I'm like, legal studies at UOIT. And they're like, why are you here? I'm like, well, let's just see. So I was the legal studies guy for my master's. It was a 2 years master's program with an extra 1.5 years to kind of condense an undergrad of architecture into 1.5 years. So it was all year, all summer. It was a grind, 4 a.m. mornings, but it was probably the most fun I ever had in school with the community like we built here at this program. The class sizes were extremely small, so the sense of community was great. The access to professors was great at Carleton as well. So there were similarities between this program and that program that really, I feel like I excelled in. Knowing that, when you have a thesis in your undergrad and then you're forced to have a thesis in your master's, that's a huge benefit. Just knowing the amount of time it takes, the relationships you need to build with your prof, the research, all of that stuff was a big help for getting me through the master's program. And then after that, I emailed every architecture firm I could possibly find in Ontario and landed in Peterborough, where I'm at Let Architects right now. So I became licensed in 2018 or 2019, I believe, as an architect, and then I bought into the company as a partner in 2022. So I was able to move through there pretty quickly, and our firm's growing like crazy. We're up to 25 staff now, so things are moving quick. But there's all that to say, there's a ton of roadblocks along the way. Just do a self-audit and check how much you want to give to that next step, or is it worth a pivot? It's never too late. I think a lot of us did a lot of school beyond UOIT, but I didn't go to Carleton until 2014. So there's a long gap between, trying to figure out what you want to be and what's going to happen here. So I think it's worth it to take that time and take a pause. You don't have to rush and just keep knocking out degrees until you think you know what you want to do. So I'll leave it at that.
We're definitely going to open this up to the audience because I know that you have questions and it's an opportunity to talk with our panelists. But I'm going to use my privilege that I've got the mic because I've got some questions that I'm genuinely curious about. And first of all, I just want to thank each of you for sharing your stories with us. So fascinating and such an eclectic group, but at the same time, some interesting overlap in your experiences. And excuse me, I know some of you touched on this, but allow me to dig a bit further. And I'm going to start with Mike. We'll go back the other way. I was thinking about this American philosopher, Lon Fuller, when you were talking about your move to architecture, because Fuller talked about the lawyer and legal education as a kind of education in social architecture. So Fuller's big thing was that, we tend to focus on courts and adjudication as being law par excellence, when in fact there's all sorts of different ways that we work through conflict, all sorts of different ways that political power is exercised, and that part of a really full education in the law is seeing that diversity of processes and understanding there's actually a certain type of ethics and rules to something like mediation or negotiation, and that these are subjects worthy of understanding. And I think what's interesting too is we hear that there's a whole array of skills and knowledge that you need in your work, even as a lawyer, that isn't necessarily just knowing what the latest appellate decision was. And I guess the question I want to ask, and because I teach legal studies, I'm a legal studies professor, is what value did you get from studying law? In terms of, and that can be interpreted any way, but in terms of the actual intellectual work that you did in the course of your undergraduate degree, what value has that had for you going forward? Yeah, and this is now exposing ourselves perhaps to some embarrassment here, but anyway.
No, it's a great question. I guess specifically for me, I'll come back to the contract piece. There's so many course offerings at the school that you can kind of find your niche and what you are interested in. I think contract law for me was, it either is or it isn't. It's written in the contract or it isn't written in the contract. But then there's the whole creative side that clearly, me personally, I had growing up. I didn't know it was going to come out in law, but there's a creative side on how you can wordsmith something or find that loophole in a contract that you have to kind of think outside the box. You could read a contract and say, this is the box that we're in, this is where we need to stay, but there's creativity that comes into everything, whether it's in a courtroom, whether it's reading a contract, whether it's whatever it may be. But for me, after getting into the world of architecture, again, it's not what you think at face value. It's not sketching on a napkin and there's a building like Frank Gehry, or you look at all these big buildings like the Sydney Opera House and all that. That's architecture with a capital A, but there's the whole world of before you can start a project, you need to sign a contract. You need to get in a room with their legal team. You need to understand what they're asking of you. You need to understand what you're asking of them, and you need to come to an agreement. Supplementary general conditions come up in everything. There's these words thrown around in a room to try to, there's kind of this social, it happens in architecture too, where we'll throw around acronyms in a room, and we're trying to, we want to democratize architecture in the sense that it's accessible to everyone, and we can't do that by throwing around our big fancy acronyms and our big words, and I feel like sometimes the legal industry does the same thing. So you feel disconnected, you feel like, well, this is law, I'm not a trained lawyer, I can't be in this world, but if you start to break down the walls of what it is and have true conversations and focus on the relationship piece, then no matter what you are in the room, you can come to an agreement. And I think that's the big piece of what I took away from here and what I took away from the contract law piece was no matter what, you're getting to an agreement. In architecture, we need to get to an agreement on the contract, we need to get to an agreement on what the building looks like, we need to get to an agreement on what's in the building. It's all these things that come full circle in terms of how a decision's made and when you sign on the dotted line to when you finish the project. And I think any contract or any legal case or anything is just another project, if that makes sense.
Well, and I think that's a really practical illustration of, I think, what a lot of my colleagues and I are trying to do, right? Like the idea of demystifying the law is also about empowering people to see the law as something that we own as members of society, right, as citizens, that it isn't just some instrument of control, but something that we are implicated in. And you're right, I think that people have a vested interest in, sometimes it's intentional in terms of intimidation, and sometimes it's forgetful and just not realizing that not everyone has that same, day-to-day experience and using such terminology or being involved in those kinds of processes. There's a famous article called "Why the Haves Come Out Ahead" about the way, one of the things that's pointed out in the article is that basically it's about how the legal system favors those who have resources, and one of the ways in which people do well in the legal system is when they're repeat players. They just know how it works, and so you can play a game better when you've done it a few times already. But which might be an interesting way to sort of then go on to our next panelist, because your job right now is looking at systemic problems, right?
Yeah, that's a large part of it. I mean, it comes, we're complaint focused a lot of the time, but it's often through an individual set of circumstances, almost like when you have a fact scenario on an exam that really demonstrates where there might be gaps in policy or unfairness, simply because, that policy didn't necessarily contemplate those set of circumstances, or the policy as it's written is having a disproportionate impact of this or that. So I think that's very interesting. And, in terms of the practical ways that, law has kind of, the legal studies program has kind of assisted me. I mean, it certainly helps to go into law school having read a case before, seen a case before, read a law before, that goes without saying. But in law school, there's not necessarily a lot of attention paid to the things behind the law, right? The philosophies behind the law, the social structures behind the law. It's just not delved into quite as deeply as we do here in some of these programs. And having that human rights specialization, really allowed you to take courses where you were delving into some of that, not only the legal part, but the social sciences aspect of what's behind those legal structures and that law. And so it's helpful to go into, I think, even a law school program, kind of having that in the back of your mind as you're going through some of that. So that's one aspect. The other aspect that I'll say is, again, I still don't know if we have the psychology of law minor still, but even if psychology courses are offered as electives, I was looking over my transcript actually in preparation for today and doing abnormal psychology, social psychology, I think it was personality psychology, being able to know things like what the not criminally responsible for reason of mental disease or defect, as it was called at the time, means, or unfit to stand trial means, and being able to understand when the Diagnostic Statistical Manual or the DSM is kind of thrown around, to kind of know some of that and go into some of these legal spaces where you are dealing with people who are encountering mental health challenges, and knowing some of the background behind the legal structures in place around that, or some of the pieces behind people who are struggling with mental health conditions, can be helpful, I think, in any job, just practically, because there's I can't pull any statistics out right now, but I think a fair few people dealing with mental health struggles that you would encounter in any job, and knowing things like how the government is set up. I know we're all supposed to learn that in high school, but I found I came away from my first year knowing a lot more about how the Canadian government is set up than I might have taken out of my high school years. And any research courses and the research work I did here with professors, the value of being able to read a study in any research and kind of evaluate its methodology and its even when you see these things in the news, just being able to go into a critical evaluation of, a study. There's so many ways, not only in your careers, but in your lives, that some of these things will come out later and help you. I think you'd really be surprised to learn how many facets of your life that things you learned in this program can be impacted. So that was my kind of thoughts about the practical applications of the program.
Great. Okay. Well, I'd like to, ask this to you as well, Rachel. But I'm thinking about the way you described how you're, in high school you're interested in history and literature and these kind of philosophical questions, and then also in terms of student politics. And all of these seem like very intellectually creative, pregnant with possibility of how to do things and imagine things differently. How did then doing legal studies prepare you for what I imagine can be sometimes a pretty restrictive environment working in government? Is it, or is that like an unfair?
Is Doug Ford listening? No, it's a great question. Yeah, and so, great question. Totally agree. So, part of being a bureaucrat for the provincial or the federal government and not working on sort of the political side is that it's our job to give evidence-based advice, options and analysis, but it's the political, representatives or party of the day who ultimately makes that final decision. So we have to stay sort of neutral in our advice, again, based on evidence, based on consultation with communities, and put that forward. And it can be difficult, in that sort of broad constraint for sure, in terms of you definitely have to live with the fact that they're not going to take your advice a lot of the times. And I liked Mike's point about creativity and strategy skills that I think you do definitely develop in this program. I remember a lot of like mock trials and having to do presentations and sort of having to go also on a side you might not agree with actually. Like you get assigned on a project to the con side and you're like, oh, I don't politically agree with this, but now I have to argue it. I actually do have to do that, in my job sometimes where I might not personally agree with the political direction of the government, but that's not my job. My job is to give the best evidence-based advice and try to think of creative strategies and ways to present that evidence so that it will sort of land better with the political government of the day. So you try to think of, what is that party's mandate? What did they campaign on? What are they trying to do in Ontario? And how does, the work that we're doing help advance that in a way that's still aligned with evidence, but trying to, just trying to give it that shot to get it to go forward. So yeah, it can be at times a constrictive sort of framework. I've worked for I'm trying to think now, technically 2 conservative governments under Doug Ford's leadership, and then started in government under the Liberal government with Premier Kathleen Wynne. And it's been really interesting just to see also different philosophies of political parties and how that changes, the actual policy and ways that funding is allocated across different things in Ontario, but also the philosophy about government itself and how we work and how they design government and those structures. So I think the creativeness of what sort of the legal program gave me in terms of thinking of like different unique arguments and how to craft a story, how to craft a narrative, but also the practical parts I think that you both talked about, that I had exposure to cases and, legal frameworks and different legal documents has also helped in my day-to-day job because we deal, with legislation, regulation changes as a result of policy or program changes the government wants to implement. And often through my career, I've been the one that's like, oh, I know how to read a legislative change. I know how to read a regulation. I work with legal a lot of the times in government as sort of the policy liaison. So it's very helpful as sort of like I'm kind of known as like a translator sometimes between like the legal and sort of policy areas, but it can be a tricky space to navigate for sure.
Well, it's interesting because it's wonderful to hear too that, even though you didn't decide to go to law school afterwards, that it sounds like what you have learned in terms of practical skills, analyzing legislation, court cases, that kind of knowledge of the system has been applicable in your work. And Ramisa, now you were describing some really interesting and quite a diversity of things that you have been doing. I mean, who knew that working for Canada Revenue Agency could be so exciting? Tell us about how, what do you kind of thinking back, value about the education that you received in legal studies for the kind of projects that you're taking on now?
So I'd say probably the skill that I gained over time in the legal studies program that has helped me not only in my current role but also in my previous work is the ability to take a certain topic or idea and break it up into smaller chunks, knowing how and where to ask certain types of questions. Okay, if this is a certain policy or program that we're looking to implement, are there any gaps in our in terms of the legal aspect? What's the social impact? Who is going to be impacted by it, and to what extent? And a lot of the time, in a lot of major government projects, we have to do something that you call a GBA plus analysis, gender-based analysis. So how is this type of programming going to impact women, marginalized communities, people of lower socio-income? These are the things that we often have to look at. No matter where you are, no matter what department you're in, no matter what office you work for, these are all very common themes that have come up for me in my work, and that's something that I've learned a lot of in the legal studies program in terms of how different institutions are connected to one another, and how to look at a certain issue or a topic from different lenses, different perspectives.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I think that's something which in all of our courses really, right, that attending to different perspectives and how, I mean, I'm always struck, you know, I'll be reading, say, a Supreme Court decision, and as we know, will consist of multiple judgments. You could have 7, you could have 9 different sets of reasons, and you read the first one and you're thinking, wow, well, this is, you know, they've really nailed it here, and then the second one, you think, oh gosh, no, they've got it, and it's diametrically opposed in its analysis, and it shows you the power of argument, you know, I've got to ask you, Katie, because I remember, you know, classes, and I was lucky to teach all of these and learn from all of these students in my classes, but I believe it was philosophy or human rights law was one that we may have done.
I have to go back
yeah.
and check.
But I guess I'm curious about how, in terms of, you know, the human rights law or philosophy of law, how has that informed your work for very large Canadian corporation, whom all of us, you know, probably do business with? What's it? How does that legal education inform the work that you're doing on a daily basis?
Yeah, I'll actually kind of backtrack a little bit and talk about where I was kind of before this, because that transition from litigation to doing an entirely different form of law, where like the courtroom really has no role in what I do these days. So actually that reference to Fuller was very interesting in the start, with this idealized notion of law as being the place in the courtroom, when in reality there's so many ways to practice law that never take you anywhere near the courtroom. And then even in litigation, when I was there, in spite of kind of the courtroom being that thing at the end of the road, like if any of you want to know how many cases actually make it to trial, it is not very many. In that year when I practiced litigation, you have court appearances along the way as kind of those smaller incremental steps. I never went to trial. Every single case I was on settled. So kind of that being the notion in our minds of what law is and what the practice of it is actually pretty far from what in reality the practice can be like generally. So going back to kind of my place in litigation and how these courses interacted with what I do, there's the thing that other people mentioned here already, which is case law, which is obviously just a huge portion of what you do as a litigator. You have to know what the law is. You have to look at case law. You have to be efficient at marking up your case law, or else you'll be up all night, because you need to be able to kind of have those readily available, marked up in a very organized fashion so you can flip to it when you're in front of the judge and kind of know exactly where to reference and what to say. So there's that aspect of it. But case law actually only gets you so far a lot of the time, especially at the firm that I was at. Like, all the cases that would come to you were going to be novel cases. because no one's going to pay your hourly rate for something that doesn't actually require your expertise and is a simple matter. So it's going to be new. It's very likely there is no case law that's directly on point. And when you're looking through case law, there's kind of three categories of case law. You know, there's good facts, bad law. So the facts match your situation, but the laws, it either went in kind of a wonky direction or it didn't go in the direction you want it to go. There's good facts, good law, which is like that's what you want. If you can find it, that's great. Or there's bad facts, bad law, which kind of speaks for itself. And you're always searching for the good facts, good law. It's not always there, and a lot of the times it's because the fact pattern that's before you has simply never come up before. It's a novel situation. So what do you turn to in those situations? You take the case law as far as you can. You rely on it because the judge expects you to rely on it, and you do your best to work with what you have. But where do you go beyond that? A lot of it you go to, what is the purpose of this law? If you're referring to a piece of legislation, what was the actual goal that they were trying to implement when they passed this? And so that can often involve looking beyond the case law and going to things like secondary sources or parliamentary debates, things like that, trying to say, this is what they were trying to get at, this is how you have to interpret it, because that's kind of the way things, and that's where you kind of start to get into more of this philosophy of law concept, when it's not just the facts and the case law references, it's what are we aiming for here? So that's kind of when I was in litigation, that was kind of a very real aspect of it. But now when I've gone kind of to the in-house role that I am now, it's so I mentioned that I can speak a bit to how practice is dealt with in a company of this nature. So there's a lot of different legal groups. In a company of this size, the legal team is almost like a law firm inside a company, and everyone is very specialized. So there is an internal litigation team within Loblaws. I'm not on it. I'm on a team that does a lot more of the corporate work, and a lot of it is negotiations. So case law doesn't have much impact on my life these days. A lot of it is kind of interpersonal work and kind of discussing things with the other side and negotiating certain points and trying to get yourself to an end result. And that's where kind of those skills around collaboration and working together, and I know people here probably don't like group work, but you have to know how to work with people. And you don't really develop those skills in law school because there is no group work. And I thought I really liked that there, and then I got to the firm, and I got to where I am now, and I realized that I can't just not work with people. I have to learn to understand them. And understanding them is a lot of what I have to do these days. And kind of going back to kind of that notion of why are we doing something? Like why was this legislation enacted? When I'm taking a stance in my day-to-day negotiations, either for commercial contracts or, quite honestly, mergers and acquisitions is a lot of what I do for the company these days. Every stance I take, I need to have a rationale behind it. Because whatever stance they take, my first question to them is going to be why? Why should I accept what you're telling me? And they better have a good explanation for it, because I'm ready with the explanation for why I want what I want. And that's not always enough to carry the day, but you have to understand things like that. You have to be able to pick something, like in contracts, for instance. A lot of people just kind of pull up a provision from something they saw in like someone else's contract or something like that, and they don't really understand why it's in there, why it serves their purpose, why I should agree to it. But if you're going to be effective at negotiations, you have to understand all of that and understand how it works together and kind of that balance. So kind of the training that I got in this program was a lot of kind of looking behind things and asking questions and understanding why. And in spite of all the facets of law and it being more than just being in the courtroom, I think that is a skill that applies to every single facet, at least that I've practiced in at this point in time.
Well, and I think there are so many parallels one can draw between what you've described about law and life. And just two things that you touched on, which I want to ask the group. And I think now, you know, if you feel you want to respond, terrific. Like you don't feel obliged. You have to go, you know, right down with everybody. Because what I'd like to do is also open it up to the floor. But I was just thinking, as you were saying that, and I realized, I mean, you're still such a young group, but you do have more experience after university than a lot of students in this room, and I thought it would be a neat opportunity to hear about both of those aspects of university, thinking back. The relational aspect, you talked about how in your legal work, so much about it is working with people. But then you also said a lot of it is about figuring out, well, what are we doing this for? And so I wonder, like looking back, what do you think now, this many years on? What was university for? And what role did relationships that you had in university at that time play in that? So don't feel you have to speak to that, but I would be, you know, I think it's interesting because I know that some of us, you know, wonder, okay, well, you know, why am I here? What am I doing? And it's true that sometimes how we end up at this institution can be a kind of accident. It's like, okay, well, I live close by, or this is the place I applied to because it made, you know, sense, right? Friends here. And yet it's almost like after the fact or down the road, we say, actually, no, there was a purpose to me being there. And I'm just curious about what, thinking back now, how do you feel about what the purpose was of going to university and going to this university and doing this program was for you?
Yeah, I think we've spoken to the kind of concrete skills a little bit and kind of the actual learnings, but kind of going to this relational point, please don't underestimate the importance of the relational point. It's not just about developing the interpersonal skills, which you have to develop. Like when I was in litigation, you don't manage your own files. You're on a team of maybe like 5 or 6, and you have to be in a room together, and you have to work through a problem, be prepared to come with your own perspective. So like I know there's group teams in undergrad where not everyone comes with their own perspective, but it's a skill you have to learn to develop, and this is the first stage where you can start to develop that and defend that perspective. And it's not just about skills development. It's a key aspect of networking, which is, I know, something that everyone will have heard of by this point in time, but you never know which person that you've interacted with will be in a position to either help or hurt your career down the road. And I think it maybe wasn't so evident when I was in undergrad, but when you're in law school, it's very, very evident because there's that 2-stage recruitment process where there's a first-year recruit, and some classmates will get recruited earlier, and they'll be at the firms you want to go to, and then there's a second-stage recruit. And having been at the firm during that point in time, I know that they ask people at the firm what their perspectives are on the new round of applicants, and if they have anything good or bad to say about them. I've never said anything negative about a person, but if there's someone that I had encountered in a group project that really displayed their commitment to the team and wanted to pull their weight, I would step up and say something positive, like, this person made a great impression on me, they're clearly a team player, something like that. So just don't ignore that possibility, even if you are going to law school, even if you're not, but don't ignore the value of the relationships and the importance of making a positive contribution to the people around you, because you just never know how that will play out in the end.
I know this will be the case for everybody in this room, but as someone who went into my undergraduate degree right out of high school, this was the first time that I was actually treated like an adult, and I had to hold myself accountable. There's no one writing you telling you have to go to class. There's no one telling you, you know, you have a term paper due at the end of the semester. This is the schedule you need to put into place to make sure it's complete by the end, or, you know, you need to study this many hours in order to, you know, be ready to be prepared for this exam. So what I learned in terms of, you know, practical things in university generally, but in particular this program, is what kind of learning worked best for me. I was a person who liked to print things out and highlight and write in the margins. I'm so sorry to the environment, the amount of pages that I printed, but I just do so much better working tactically with the paper in front of me versus digitally. Those are skills that I took to my job. I did so much better when I was preparing for an interview with a government organization or a complainant, having printed out the material, engaged with it. How do I like to research? Do I like soft music in the background? Do I like complete silence? And knowing how that I liked to learn and absorb material and engage with material, and how I like to work, allowed me to enter my job having that really strong sense of self in terms of how I worked best. And so I was able to set myself up in my career for success, in terms of, knowing how I worked best and being able to, engage in that conversation with my managers of like, this is how I work best. If this works for the organization, this is how I would like to do it. And, I think you'll find that if you know yourself and you have some practice, which you do get in university, advocating for yourself, and how it is, you work best and are going to be successful in a career, a lot of workplaces, if it's within their means, they will work with you on that. And so using this time to develop your professional self and, try out a few things and just really learning yourself and knowing yourself will help you, and you'll be able to project confidence in your career going forward about how it is, you work best, what type of work environment will work best for you. And when, you're potentially overwhelmed by the amount of choices at the end of the day, that in and of itself can help you narrow down options when you're facing down the gauntlet of, as many LinkedIn type posts or Indeed posts as you could possibly fathom, knowing yourself. And even if you don't know what type of job you want to do, the way you like to work can really help narrow down that option. So that's something that, university generally, I think, really helped me with. But in particular, this program, I think, lends a lot to that. Particularly, I'll echo the honors thesis. You're told at the end of 1 year, you have to produce this document. And of course, your professors are there to help you and mentor you and coach you and bounce ideas off of. But at the end of the day, it's on you to produce this document. So that was like the ultimate test, I think, of time management and, putting yourself out there in terms of, wanting to engage with professors and develop those relationships, to your point.
One quick thing. What I wanted to add to sort of to your point about like being so young coming into university, it's for a lot of people too, the first time, like maybe you've literally left home and you're sort of on your own, but also maybe it's the first time you're outside of the echo chamber of your family and friends, and really getting exposed to different viewpoints. Some of the classes, like I did the human rights law specialization as well, and I think I left university, I hope, as a more just like broadly educated person, and I think learned a lot of things I hadn't realized about our government systems, our legal systems, how they fail people, how they are inappropriately structured, or have like colonization and everything has been a part of our history in Canada for so long, and like really challenged a lot of perspectives I might have grown up with at home, and no fault to my parents, but just how we're all raised. So I think it's another big thing that I sort of look back on undergrad from. Like I came here to get what I thought was going to be a legal studies degree and then go to law school and be a practicing lawyer, and came out totally different, but left with I think like a set of principles and values that I sort of developed during my time of like questioning beliefs that I had and learning new and different viewpoints. And then also, I think to Kate's point about like engaging in community, I really wanted to go to a smaller school to not get lost in a sea of 1,000 students and to be a part of a community. And so, getting involved in those school programs or like athletics or anything like that. I still have some of my best friends today are from school, and not even necessarily from this program, but from other programs at Ontario Tech that we either did student politics together or like recreational soccer or whatever, but just sort of rounding out that experience as well.
Unless you want to ask another question.
No, please.
Just to echo everything that's been saying up here, I think, undergrad is a stepping stone. You're all in this room because you hopefully want to be and because there's free pizza, but we're all here. We all went into this program because there is an interest. An undergraduate degree is a stepping stone to a master's degree in whatever it might be. It's a stepping stone into realizing this isn't what you want to do with your career. It's a stepping stone to realizing it is what you want to do with your career. It gives you an opportunity to reflect on yourself, and I think for me, and I don't want to speak for everyone up here, but you really get what you give in terms of the program. It's also a great song, but in terms of the program itself, you really do get what you give. You know, if you're putting in the long hours, if you're treating it like a like a 9 to 5 or 8 to 4, whatever it might be, it's on you. It's the first time where you're responsible and you're accountable for, you know, what your future looks like. Then you get into the real world, you're hired for a job. They expect you to be accountable. They expect you to show up at 8 when you're supposed to be there at 8. They expect you to stay late if you need to stay late. You know, how quick you get promoted or how quick you can change careers, or if you have people reaching out to you on LinkedIn, you know, truly I feel it's because of what you put into it and how much effort's there. And if you're accountable to yourself and you're accountable to making the decision and sticking by it, then I think, you know, everyone in this room is bound for success for sure.
So my point is pretty much exactly what you just put out there. To me, when I started university, my thought process was the fact that I can even be here in a post-secondary institution, study a topic that I'm interested in, that in itself is an immense privilege, which not everybody gets to enjoy. We are all extremely privileged to be sitting where we are today, because I'm sure there are people out there that would literally kill to be where we are. So that was kind of my mindset coming into this program, and I think that can go for just post-secondary in general. I was determined to make the most out of my 4 years here, so that's essentially what I tried to do. I thought I'd be doing a disservice to myself if I did anything less than that. So I went on full nerd mode and went to all my professors' classrooms. I got insight from them on how to do well on the exams. I made the most of it, put myself out there, got involved in different extracurriculars. Just to reiterate, I think all those experiences combined, not to toot my own horn, but it all contributed towards making me, or helping shape me into a more well-rounded individual, because I knew for myself I didn't just want to be someone whose head was in the books all the time. I always knew from the beginning that making a difference in my community, in any way, large or small, is the ultimate goal for me. And I saw this program as a vehicle for me to be able to do that. But I knew that simply studying and doing well in school would not be enough for me to do that. Sometimes you have to take some initiative to take an extra step outside of the classroom. Sometimes you may just need to end up doing that. And there's lots of support for you to explore those kinds of options, not just in the form of professors, but also some of your peers who might be sitting right next to you. Never underestimate the power of who you meet. Every interaction can potentially make a difference in where you end up. Definitely invest time into forming relationships with people. It's how you expand your perspectives. It's how you grow as an individual.
Well, and it's how you make a difference in the lives of others too. And I really appreciate all of you being here today, because there's so much wisdom, I feel, that's been shared. And I want to give the audience members now a chance. If you have a question, please raise your hand, and I'll try and come around with the mic so that we can pick it up on the recording too. Yeah, we've got. Oh, okay. Well, I can walk around. Yeah? Okay. And maybe just introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Kristen, and I'm a fourth-year legal studies student. Just wondering, many of you mentioned Ontario Tech, or UIOT at the time, was kind of unknown and kind of small, and you had to kind of, like, I guess, school people on it. and I'm assuming that it didn't deter you because you all went on for graduate work, but like, was that like, did it make it more difficult to get into grad school? Was there anything like that stopped you there? Or, well, not stopped you, but like maybe made it a little bit more difficult?
I can, in terms of getting into graduate school, is that what you're asking? If it made it more difficult?
Yeah, I guess.
Not at all. It was interesting actually. I was in my program, the public admin program at Queen's. I was actually the first individual from UIT to come into that program for my year anyway. There wasn't anybody else from UIT. So I guess just in terms of representation, I was the only individual from the school, but no. I'm not sure exactly what the acceptance process is like, if they differentiate between schools, and whether or not that makes a difference in the GPA or the quality of the degree that may have. I'm not sure if that factors into it. Only they would know that. But no, for me, it didn't have any disadvantage at all. In the long run, I actually think going to a smaller school was an advantage for me because I knew that I didn't just want to be a number in whatever university I went to. I wanted to go to a school that allowed me to build relationships with people, where my professors know my name, and that's exactly what ended up happening.
It can be a good thing. It can be because when you find someone else from UIT, Ontario Tech, you're like a little club. So I've been told what happened in the boardroom at Davies when my application came through the door, because there is a total of one other lawyer I know on Bay Street that came from this university, and she was in that room at the time. And someone picked up my resume and said, "Oh, this person went to your university," and she said, "No way." So it made me noticeable in a way that where maybe I would have faded in with the other resumes a little bit more, but because it was because we have a smaller graduating class coming from here, because it's more unique to encounter another graduate from the university, it made me more recognizable to her, and she kind of paid extra attention of it because she recognized me as someone else that she doesn't usually encounter when the resumes come through the door. So I understand your point. Sometimes it can work in the opposite direction, and like it probably helped me a little bit at the end of the day in that case.
I was just quickly going to say, a colleague of mine and I, now we both came into the province, but we both were in student government together. He was 2 years ahead of me. We ended up applying to the Queen's Masters of Public Admin at the same time, and I remember thinking like, oh my God, I'm not going to get in, because like he's going to get in. Like they're not going to take two of us. Maybe no one knows what this school is, and we both got in, and we're like, they took both of us, this is great. But I think same thing about sort of the network too. I think because we are out here in the world working, but it's still maybe smaller than like U of T. I think that does create actually more of like an intimate network in a way that people, see you and are like, oh my gosh, me too. And it has helped as well. I know even for me, for the public or for the government, we have a lot of like co-op programs that we bring in students. And when I got the privilege to start getting to be part of those hiring panels and co-ops, the first thing I said was, why isn't Ontario Tech on the list? Like they had a list of Queen's, U of T, blah, blah, regular schools. Ontario, I have to keep saying Ontario Tech. Ontario Tech has a policy program, a legal studies program, criminology, like it's all the same skill sets to bring students in. And at least for infrastructure, I've helped bring in like 2 Ontario Tech students to the ministry who like they hadn't even heard of them before. And they were like, oh, awesome. So like new sort of feeder programs. So I agree. I think it could feel that way, but I don't think it disadvantaged any of us. But
I'll echo a lot of what's being said and saying there are so many advantages to going to, what some might consider a smaller school. I had opportunities here that I wouldn't have had anywhere else. Being in leadership positions in clubs, being selected to be research assistants for professors, being able to have, going to a professor's office hours without having a queue out the door where you never get seen. All of that, even having the professors know your name in some cases is an advantage you would get here that you may not get somewhere else. And I'll say I learned that lesson. And when I applied and ultimately accepted the offer that I got for the University of Victoria, it was on my mind that it was also known to be a little bit of a smaller law school program compared to some of the other ones. And I looked forward to having those same advantages there that I enjoyed here. At the time UOIT, now Ontario Tech, and I did get the same type of attention there that I felt allowed me to flourish here, and that's always been a good lesson for me going forward. And I did do some research in advance. I'm not sure again if law schools kind of some law schools weigh where you got your undergrad, but I deliberately looked for law schools that were understood to have a very holistic approach to the applications. And so I knew that some of my experience in extracurriculars would be, weighted well. And those are advantages I had here because of the smaller school size. And so I'll say that it is actually, you can learn here whether you like that smaller kind of class size dynamic, or whether you feel you would thrive, being perhaps in one of many type of situation. I personally thrived in this environment, and knowing that about myself allowed me to take that lesson going forward and apply it to my future prospects, and that worked very well for me. So.
Yeah, I won't add too much. There were 0 UOIT grads in architecture school. But it was a heck of a lot of fun to prove everyone wrong. U of T you go to U of T, whether you got a C or whether you got an A, you're still a U of T grad. But coming from UOIT, which I'll still say because we rep old school, coming from UOIT, it's fun to say, well, yeah, I went to UOIT. Tell them the story. Like, share in the story. This is something new. We helped build it. All of you are helping to build this. Let it, say it proudly. Like, we're only getting bigger. We have a name change, rebranding. There's things happening. I drove into Oshawa here today, and like just the building that's going around the school, the main campus. Being in architecture now, seeing the buildings that have gone up, some of them are absolutely stunning. One day it would be amazing to say I designed one of the buildings on campus. It's a sense of community. It's also kind of fun to see if people are calling it Durham College or Ontario Tech now, and I think we're starting to make the transition to it being Ontario Tech. No offense to Durham College, but.
I'm so glad you asked that question. And it's true, like these student associations, for example, that you guys built and were on the ground floor of, I mean, these are the ones that you're involved in today. And so the way in which you influence the direction and build those groups and establish new ones, that's a legacy for future students. In the same way that the careers that you guys are leading, that means that when somebody here is applying, whether it's to government or whether it's to law school or a law firm or an architecture firm or whatever, that they're like, oh, we know someone from that institution, and so this is how it happens. I mean, this is the process. Anyone else? Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. So I guess first I would like to thank all the panelists and everyone here today for showing up. I know it's coming down to downtown Oshawa at night may seem a little bit intimidating for some people, but I'm very glad that everyone showed up. Yeah, it's like the parking situation, but yeah. So thank you so much. I'm Celine. I'm a third-year legal studies student, and I'm also serving on multiple student associations. Most prominently, I'm the board of director for this faculty for the student union, so that's kind of fun. But one of the questions that I kind of wanted to ask everyone here, I think in all of your introductions, you've all addressed, like, in some way, shape, or form, kind of like the roadblocks that you've experienced from just like life and just trying to get into different sectors of like the legal field or like in architecture. So I kind of want to ask, what kind of kept you motivated to get into, like, let's say law school or like taking the LSAT, or kind of just kept you motivated whenever you face like systemic not discrimination, but systemic like challenges? And do you think that any of the experiences and or learned skills that you've gotten from this university has helped you in that?
Great question. I think, as I said earlier, you know, you get what you give in this program. I think for me personally, it was, you know, you graduate from the degree and you've already come this far. Like, what's one roadblock? You know, it's like if you do poorly on an exam, it's just challenging you to do better on the next one. And that's just life. Like, it's not, if university was easy, everyone would be in this room right now going through the same thing. If graduating was easy, everyone would graduate. If going to master's was easy, everyone would do that. Like, it's kind of fun. It's all part of the experience. Like, hit a roadblock, go around it. The same thing we do in our car if we're driving. The road's closed, you find a new way to get to where you're going, right? So I think that's honestly all I would say about that is don't let, you know, roadblocks stop you from getting to where you want to go. There's always a different way. Maybe it takes an extra year. Maybe it's, you know, finding a detour of doing specialization in something else or doing a night class at Durham College, even though I just bashed them a little bit. It doesn't really matter how you get there as long as you get there. And the experience along the way and the people you meet along the way, whether it takes you 4 years longer, will just make your experience that much stronger and expand your network that much more. And when you graduate and when you get into the industry, the network that you build here is the network that's going to, as someone said earlier, I think, open the doors for you if those roadblocks are closed. So.
Yeah, well said. I glossed over some of my roadblocks, but I'll tell you, they were still there. You know, I did take the LSAT multiple times. That was why I looked for a university that had a holistic application process. And it still worked out, you know. And as they say, someone who graduates, you're still a graduate, whether, you know, you were at the top of the class or not. That process that I believe Kate alluded to in law school, that's called the on-campus interview or OCI process. I went through the gauntlet of interviews without a job offer, and I actually moved back to Ontario after I graduated law school without an articling position because I felt like searching for an articling position, you know, while living with my parents was better than paying rent in British Columbia. But I did end up getting a position, and I did get called to the bar and became a lawyer and had a successful career. So I think, you know, at some point you just realize that it is going to work out eventually. Maybe not the way you thought, maybe not within the timeline that you originally thought it would, but if you can look back at the end of the day and say, did I give this the best shot I had based on what I had to offer at that time in my life? And I think that's a valid question because, you know, not everybody's going to be able to give 100% to everything all the time. We're human, we're not machines. You're going to be operating sometimes at 60%, sometimes at 80%. Maybe you can ratchet it up to 100% for a period of time, but, you know, burnout is a real thing. So the question is, even if you face these roadblocks and setbacks, did I get it the best I had to offer at that time based on what I had to give? And if the answer is yes, still be proud of yourself. Dust yourself off, pick yourself up, and try again, because eventually, you know, something else is going to happen that's going to build some momentum, and it is going to work out one way or the other. So.
Two things it made me think of. So one is sort of to the end of Danielle's point around learning how to prioritize and multitask and find school life balance and then translates into work life balance. When I was at UIT, I worked a part-time job 3 or 4 days a week to pay for school. I was a part of like 2 or 3 clubs. I was a board director. I get it. We can talk. It was crazy. Looking back now, I'm like, I literally don't know how I was like alive, actually, maybe like functioning. And I think it helped give me actual sense of like where my boundaries and limits are and learn sometimes like good enough has to be good enough. I was still a really good student, but you know, had to just sort of learn how to balance things and failed a lot at it, lots of all-nighters writing papers and stuff, but that skill set helped me then in grad school to like grad school skim and just get by, you know, as best as I could. And then even through work about figuring out how to sort of, yeah, bring that balance into your life. And then I did want to actually touch on the more serious point that you kind of raised but joked about, but I think is a really good point. When I was here at school and in student government, I did face a lot of discrimination and sexism, being one of the first like female student politicians, I guess, for the faculty and then at higher levels in student government. And that was really difficult, and it required a lot of resilience and therapy and mental health supports that I accessed for the first time in my life at school. And you know, moving forward into my professional career, I've now been in like more of a male-dominated space in infrastructure. I feel like no surprise. Government generally is pretty 50-50 actually of a sort of gender split, but it still skews social science ministries to more women or those who identify as women, and then sort of the natural sciences or economic ministries tend towards more men. And so when I first came to infrastructure, it was all mostly men and all men in sort of leadership positions, and sort of having had that resilience and ability to just like stand tall in myself and my confidence and really use that has helped me in a more sort of male-dominated field. And now the ministry had lots of good change in leadership, and there's a lot of good diversity in terms of like race, experience, women as well. But it is something that sort of came up during earlier parts of my extracurriculars and experiences when I was younger that helped me later on in my career as well.
Something that I learned to do over time, not just in life, but also as a student when I was here in the program, is to lean into your support system as often as you can. No matter how intelligent or strong of a person you might be, I think it's pretty rare that anyone gets through anything completely alone. Whether it's school, whether it's work, whatever it is, at some point or another, you're going to end up leaning on somebody. So that's exactly what ended up happening for me whenever I felt anxious about exams, about a paper that's due, whatever it was. I would talk to some of my peers, some of my friends who I'm still friends with today. I also kept open communication with some of my professors as well. I remember there was one time where I had a lot going on at one point. I asked for an extension and I was granted one. That doesn't always happen. But like I said before, it's very good to be self-aware of how you're feeling and to not let that define who you are or let that get you down. It's very, very normal to feel the highs and the lows, especially as a post-secondary student. I remember being a post-secondary student, especially a working one, it's almost like having multiple jobs. It's very rare that you're gonna get through it alone. So don't be afraid to lean into your support system when you need to.
My entire time at the firm was a challenge for me, which is why I didn't last very long. That whole type and style of practice is based around, or really only works for people with a certain lifestyle and in certain life circumstances. Actually, one of two life circumstances. You either have no attachments and you're all alone, so you don't have to worry about maintaining any relationships in your life, or you've got a stay-at-home partner that can manage all the home and house care and child care responsibilities because you don't have time for it, and they don't really mind if they don't see you for long periods of time. Maybe you've got some kids you want to enroll in private school, go on one nice vacation a year, have a cottage that you never go to or that you work from when you're there. And that's kind of, I'm generalizing to quite a substantial degree, but generally speaking, that's the kind of life circumstance that can fit when you're working at one of those types of law firms. And it didn't work for me. And there is a transition that's happening there because it doesn't work for most of the new associates that are coming in. but it's still very much kind of the way it is at the partnership levels. And that's one of the reasons I really struggled while I was there. I didn't fit in that. I valued the relationships in my life. I couldn't just put them at the wayside. The firm was not the one and only thing that mattered to me. And to kind of get past that whole challenging period of time, I kind of had to realize that more broadly in life too, but every career decision you make is going to involve certain trade-offs. And you make those trade-offs based on what is important to you. So you have to think about them and weigh them out and think about what you're giving up, because you always have to give something up. And I had to give things up when I made that move, but you have to pit that against what you're gaining and what's more important to you. When you're in that kind of circumstance, most of the time you don't have to stay in them. A lot of people kind of feel trapped in those circumstances for a number of reasons. Attachment to the prestige, it's a matter of pride, or a matter of needing kind of that income to maintain the lifestyle they've already developed. But I had to really think about, what do I want, and am I getting it from this place? And if I'm not, I don't have to stay. And to the extent that I have to give things up, like those factors that I mentioned before, how do they compare to what I'm gaining? And like if what you're gaining from making a move is where you really place your importance, then it's a good move. And that's really kind of, I think, a key process to getting past those particular types of challenges. And that's kind of how I found myself where I am now, which is far more aligned with the things I want in life, which is, time to commit to things other than work, not having that be the entirety of what my life is about.
Thanks. We're coming to a close shortly, and I know there may be some who had questions. So I think what I'd like to do is we'll take the questions all at once, and then we'll give the panelists an opportunity to respond to those and give a kind of final thought, okay?
So just kind of going off of the challenges that you guys experienced, in hindsight, with the information and the perspectives that you have now, I'm curious if you could look back, is there anything you would maybe do differently, or I don't want to use the word regrets, but like just advice maybe you would give your past self to approach things maybe in a different way that could have helped you to get where you are now? Oh. My name's Rita. I'm a fourth year legal studies.
It's kind of an interesting question to follow what I just talked about.
Sorry. So my name is Tamira. I am a fourth year legal studies student. And so the reason why I even came today is thank you so much for coming and answering all the questions. But it's because I'm at a point where, I'm finishing my degree and I'm very confused because I also was thinking about the traditional way of, going into law school, becoming a lawyer, blah, blah, blah. But I'm at that point where I'm very confused. So my question actually is directly for Mike, actually, because my biggest thing is being able to, do that legal studies undergrad, but then figuring out, being like, hey, maybe that's not what I want to fully focus into, and going into something outside of the so-called traditional way. It also has a lot of society pressure and family pressure that you're going to have to surpass. So that's something that I'm going through directly right now. So I'd like to know how you overcame that and what steps or what tips you'd have for someone trying to overcome the same thing.
Hi, my name is Aldwin Salvaraja. I'm a first-year legal studies student. I was wondering if one was going to pursue to be a lawyer, what course of action would you take? So I know someone in the panel discussed going to the UK and going to law school, where there is a lower admission requirement. However, where you would need to take the NCA exam, or you would go to the traditional route, which is more competitive and requires an LSAT and a higher GPA. So I was wondering, what course of action would you take or your friends took?
Anybody else before? Yeah, okay.
Hi, I'm Brady Bendel. I'm a fourth-year student here. Thanks again for everyone sharing their stories. It's very reassuring to hear that, no path has an end. You can find a new way to branch off. So I was wondering if any of you have any plans for what's next. Is there an area of law or even outside of law that you have an interest in that you would like to pursue, or you maybe would have chosen to pursue instead of continuing your careers here?
Everyone's wondering now why I did all those question asking at the beginning, because we've just been getting such a terrific set of questions from the audience. So I'm going to leave it with you all, maybe just a short wrap-up addressing whichever of the questions you feel moved to right now, and just leaving us with a parting thought.
I'll do a super brief answer to that last question first, because if someone does offer me a fully remote working position, that might be my next path. Until then, I'm pretty content, but this going back to in-office model is, I've gotten used to working in sweatpants. It's hard to go back. But kind of going back now to the first question, whether you have any regrets. I mean, it would sound like I should have, after my answer to the last question, how I wasn't really happy at my last job. But to be perfectly honest, I don't regret having had that experience. I think I learned a lot from it. I think those kinds of environments, while they're very difficult and while I didn't want to stay there, it was absolutely excellent training. Because as I alluded to earlier, it's the type of place where you're going to have super challenging work. Everything's going to be novel. Everything's going to require in-depth thought, and it's going to be very fast-paced, but that's how you learn. And to have done that for a short period of time, I think really let me grow and develop as a lawyer in a shorter span period than if I had been somewhere that was maybe a bit more relaxed. And then it also kind of gave me a background from which I could jump off and find somewhere that suited me better. So, like, in spite of having ended up somewhere where I wasn't happy, for the time period that was there, I took a lot of value out of it, and I think I've used that value to get me to where I am. So sometimes it's about kind of finding the value in those past experiences, and I don't regret having taken that particular path.
I guess to answer the question from the woman in the back, I'm sorry, I totally blanked on your name. I apologize. Be happy to chat after this session as well, just because if you want to have some more time. But I guess, for me, it was the hardest part is setting goals rather than timelines. As soon as you set a timeline, you set yourself up for failure, for disappointment, for saying, oh, I didn't do my master's right after undergrad, so, the conversation with family is like, well, what are you doing now? You graduated. I got that all the time. If you're not going to be a lawyer, what are you going to be? Where are you going? What are you going to do? Oh, you're moving to Alberta now. I'm like, well, yeah, sure, why not? There's oil and gas out there, and there's file folders, and, the Calgary Stampede or whatever. It's all part of finding your true self. And to be completely honest, when I graduated my undergrad, I didn't still really know who I was as a person. I was still finding out who I was, still finding out what I was interested in. Yeah, law was neat, but, I joined multiple different clubs outside of school to pursue other interests. I took classes for writing screenplays because I was going to go to Hollywood. Like, there's all these things that you can do in your spare time to try to find who you are as a person and find what works. And I think, family and the people around you need to understand that it takes time. And I think moments like this, they can hear stories that it isn't one after the other, after the other, after the other, that the pauses in between are actually where you find out who you are, where you have some of the most fun you can have, and it leads you to ultimately where you want to end up in the end. So happy to take that offline afterwards as well.
I wouldn't say I have any regrets in terms of the path that I took academically or career-wise, because or else I don't think I would have ended up where I am today. That being said, if I had to go back and do anything differently, I really felt like I was on a timeline or a conveyor belt, and I had to do everything right then and stick to the plan, starting from undergrad. So I took on research assistants and a part-time job and a peer tutor gig and work with the Student Law Association and work with the Pride Social Advisory Committee, and it didn't leave a whole lot of time for the other things I valued in my life. You know, friends, family, and your social life, you know, having a bit of fun. And this may not be the case for everybody. You know, some people might have been able to strike that balance. I don't know that I did it particularly well, and I stressed myself out to the point of being quite anxious a lot of the time. And so if I were to go back, I think I would just remind myself to enjoy the ride a little bit more and have, you know, some more fun. Not that I didn't have fun. This is a fun place. I loved my time here, but, you know, stressing yourself out to the point where it's affecting you mentally, you know, is not the way. You can be successful without that. And so if I could go back and speak to my undergrad self, it's like, yeah, do the things, do the clubs, but you don't need to do everything right now and feel like you have to give 100% of yourself 100% of the time. Make room for the other things that are important in your life. And that way you can make sure that you know, end up with perhaps fewer regrets in terms of, you know, wanting to, you know, give everything to one aspect of your life and not creating that balance. So I'll say that's something for everybody to keep in mind here. Your future career prospects are important, and you want to make sure you value those, but balance is also key. So.
Oh, good. I was like, I didn't know if you were going. I agree 100%. I was a very, very serious young person, and I know we're still young. But yeah, I know partially, you know, I got to the, you know, level of success that I had younger because I did all of those things. But I think I would tell my 20-ish-year-old self to just like be a little easier on myself. And to Danielle's point, like, and I think Mike's point that it reminds me of the movie like Everything Everywhere All at Once or something. Like it doesn't have to be all at once. There's gap years, there's things to do. I definitely put that pressure on myself and had some of that pressure from my family too. Even frankly, when I wanted to do student government, instead of go straight to school, which was still a really good thing, I think, my family was like, what are you doing? Like, you have to go to school right away or you might not go. And I was like, it's 1 year. Like, I just want to do something different for 1 year. So I agree. I think just they're going to leave here going to all the pub nights, but like just going to a few more pub nights or just finding ways to like relax, however that balances for you with like extracurriculars or, you know, mindfulness, things for yourself. I wish, yeah, if I could go back and tell myself just to be a bit more gentle there. And then I liked the question about the sort of what's next. So I've been in management in the Ontario Public Service for about 2 or 3 years, sort of on and off, and really enjoyed it. I've been in a couple different ministries, and I've just started a new role this last year where I got to build a team from scratch of about 8 people who I'm very emotionally attached to now, and have really enjoyed being sort of a formal leader and getting to build the team and culture I want to see in the OPS and what I hope is sort of the OPS of the future. I love school, so I actually just recently started a sort of coaching program, so a leadership and performance coaching program, partially to help me with work as sort of a leader of people and teams, but considering potentially pursuing that on the side as a sort of part-time business or something like that, because what I've enjoyed most about leadership is actually sort of the more coaching, performance development conversations, and always sort of geared towards that from sort of a mentorship perspective. So that's truthfully what I might sort of explore next. And I'm on LinkedIn as well, if anyone wants to chat too. I think a lot of the panelists, as we said, it's a intimate network to reach out to as well, because I won't be able to stick around too long after, but wanted to say that as well.
So similarly to the 2 ladies who just spoke about balancing fun with your ambitions, I kind of experienced that similarly as well, because while I was a bit of a slacker in high school, I decided to make a change when I got to university, and I kind of just went straight into study mode, and I feel like I may have lost out on some opportunities to put myself out there a little bit more, especially in my first year. So while I don't regret any of that, because I did make that change from second year onwards, I feel like something maybe I could have done a little bit more of is put myself out there, try to form different kind of relationships right from the beginning instead of doing it a little bit later. Also, something that I think I probably could have done a bit differently, which also relates to the second question in terms of family disappointment, is maybe be a little bit more upfront with my family about the fact that I was exploring other options apart from law school. They didn't find that out until I got my master's acceptance letter delivered to our house. And they were completely devastated when I decided not to do law school, which was not surprising. But I feel like going back, I could have been a little bit more upfront with just planting the seed that, hey, mom and dad, I know that law school is something that we've discussed, that I've discussed going into. But after having spoken to some of my professors and some of my peers and doing some research on my own, I am exploring some options, and here are some things that I think might be good for me. I think one reason why parents a lot of the time are afraid, in my experience, is because they're afraid of the unknown. Law school just seems like the safe thing to do. Law school, MBA, what have you. It just seems like the safe path to take. Anything other than that, they're not too familiar with it. So I feel like once, and part of that is also kind of on you to do your own research and explore what is actually out there to show them that you actually have a plan and you're not just talking. So I think that's also one thing that you could potentially do to lessen the blow a little bit, to maybe avoid disappointment, to show that you actually have an idea of what you're doing and you're not just talking. You actually have looked into other options and you have an idea of why. On the question of what's next, I'm actually at that point where I've been on my team for about 2.5 years now in my position. So I am actually looking to transition into something new, different kind of field. What that looks like, I'm not totally sure. But that's why I got involved in a couple of other volunteer initiatives, both inside work and outside. I'm hoping that is going to open some doors for me in the future. Now, while I am not practicing counsel, I did go through the law school process myself in terms of applying for the LSAT and everything. So in response to the third question, if someone wants to be a lawyer, what the next course of action would be. So what I would do personally is look into what schools you would want to attend, whether it's in this province or outside of it. What are their admission requirements, and where are you at in terms of being able to meet those requirements, whether you may need to work on your GPA, whether you may need to start building relationships with professors, whether you may need to start getting involved in extracurriculars so you can put that. You have something to talk about in your application. That's something that's probably what I would do next, looking into where you are and what kind of gaps you might need to meet in order to qualify for certain law programs. And also start maybe talking to your professors, maybe get their opinion on what they think might be a good next course of action. Also start building relationships on that end as well, because part of the process of going to law school is you need recommendations from your professors. I don't know how it is for every school, but that's at least what it was for me.
Well, we've come to the end of today's session, and we have some small tokens of thanks. Yes. There's some swag here. Of course, swag has hit a snag, literally. That's okay. We had one extra. Okay.
Well, we got 4.
So as I hand these out, I just These are just small tokens, but something to remember your alma mater by. And alma mater is an expression in Latin, and it literally means generous mother. So I don't know how generous you're going to find this small token of thanks, but it occurs to me that a university is really the people who make it up. And this university is the graduates who have gone before you and the students who are to come. And I thank you guys for your generosity today. You shared so much with us, and I want to thank you all for the thoughtful questions and your attentive presence. And it's made me just really proud to be a part of this university, and I wish you continued success and look forward to having you back here again and to hear about how that road is unfolding for you. So please join me in a warm thank you to our panelists tonight. Thanks. Good night.